There's a reported new target in the Mueller probe. This time it's a former Obama White House counsel, Greg Craig. The Department of Justice reportedly looking at lobbying work that Craig performed for the Ukrainian president in 2012, a case initially probed by special counsel Robert Mueller. John Yoo is a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the George W. Bush administration. He is also a professor of law at the University of California at Berkeley. John, thanks very much for being with us. We had Professor Alan Dershowitz on in the previous hour. He says that he doesn't think this Craig case ought to be prosecuted. He doesn't think any of these cases ought to be prosecuted because the Foreign Agents Registration Act, the violation that's in question here, is so complicated. Your answer?
Well, Alan's a great criminal defense lawyer, and this is often what great criminal defense lawyers say. But the law is pretty clear. If you take on a foreign government as a client and you engage in political activity on their behalf, it's not illegal. You just have to register with the United States government. Here, I think the prosecutors have to go after Mr. Craig because they have to show they're being even-handed. They're basically prosecuting him for the same conduct that they're prosecuting Paul Manafort for. The second point I think is important to mention is that this underscores yet again that what Mr. Manafort's being prosecuted for has nothing to do with President Trump or the Trump campaign. As you mentioned, this is for conduct occurred in 2012, right, 4 years before Manafort became campaign manager, and involves activity representing Ukraine government in Washington, D.C., unconnected to any efforts or claims of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. But
isn't it the case that FARA violations, Foreign Agents Registration Act violations, have rarely been prosecuted, or if they have been in the past, they've resulted in fines and not jail time? I mean, Paul Manafort's looking at 7 years.
Yes, that's a good question. It hasn't been prosecuted very often. In fact, I think the Justice Department is now forming a new unit, along with the FBI, to start bringing these cases more often. What this shows, both the Craig and the Manafort cases, is that this culture of lobbying for foreign governments, not complying with very simple reporting requirements, is widespread in Washington. I wouldn't go so far as to say Washington's a swamp, but you see the influence peddling game, unfortunately, at its worst here. The other thing is, with regard to Mr. Craig in particular, he was the White House counsel. You could say, oh, I didn't know about this law, it's too complicated. The White House counsel's job is to advise not just the president, but everyone in the White House about their ethical duties. He would be intimately familiar with a statute to prevent violations from people leaving the White House or coming in.
There well, you said that you think it's important that the special counsel, or in this case the Justice Department, go after Republicans and Democrats with equal vigor. Do you think that that's what's at work here after some of the heat that the Department of Justice took over the Manafort prosecution, that they're simply trying to find a Democratic fish to fry?
I think that's part of it. I think part of it is also that Craig was hired by Manafort, actually, using the money that Manafort was not reporting to the government, using some of the money I assume that Manafort was hiding. The penalty here is up to 5 years in jail. Manafort, of course, was charged for a lot more than this. He was charged with money laundering, not reporting his money to the IRS. I think Craig here, as far as I can tell, is just being charged with violating the reporting requirement. So he's not going to be on the hook for as much as Manafort was.
John Yoo, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. Good to have you on. Thank you.
Former Vice President Joe Biden appears to be inching closer to launching a 2020 presidential campaign. Biden reportedly telling close friends and supporters that he will be running for the Democratic nomination. But he needs to raise cash. The Wall Street Journal writes this: former Vice President Biden told at least a half a dozen supporters on Tuesday he intends to run for president and ask for their help in lining up contributions from major donors so he can quickly raise several $1 million. The Journal also reports that Biden is concerned that he will not rake in the same kind of online donations as Beto O'Rourke and Bernie Sanders. In the first 24 hours of their campaign announcements, respectively, Beto brought in a record $6.1 million, while Bernie Sanders tallied nearly $6 million himself. Meantime, in a new CNN poll of a crowded field of Democratic contenders, Biden leads the pack. 28% of Democratic voters and left-leaning independent voters say they would most likely support Biden for the party's nomination, with Bernie Sanders in second at 20%. Guy, did Vice President Biden miss his opportunity, you think, to run against Hillary Clinton, or is this his time?
I think he might be kicking himself over 2016, but I wouldn't say that he's past his time yet, right? And clearly Democratic voters agree. One thing that strikes me about these polls, and there's been a few of them this week, showing Biden by some margin, some significant margin ahead of the rest of the pack, is the rest of the pack has been in. Some of them for many weeks at this point. They're doing town hall meetings. They're on national television. They're actively campaigning on the ground. Biden's doing none of those things, and yet stubbornly, consistently, he's at the top of the heap, meaning that there's a lot of Democratic voters looking at the people who are declared and saying, I'm not satisfied with this crew yet. I want to see Joe Biden get into this thing. I think the reason that we're seeing him maybe delay a little bit here could be tactical, could be fundraising, getting ducks in a row. But it does sort of seem, because he's been inching closer now for a long time, he might be really thinking hard about legacy. Because right now he's an elder statesman. He was the vice president of the United States for 8 years. Does he want his last major political contribution to be the third time he loses the presidency? And I think that's something weighing on his mind, which is why he isn't announced yet. Yeah, but I think it looks like he's going to.
Well, and I wonder how much recognizability plays a role. And I know we were talking during the commercial break. You know, when people start to, clip off the boxes of people that they support, Joe Biden's a name for all of those reasons.
Totally.
Elder statesman. He's been in the bloodstream of politics in America for so many decades that people already know him. And they figure, he's an affable guy. The things that they know about him actually even click the boxes of likability, which we know for Hillary Clinton, Jessica, was such a big issue.
He doesn't shoot and he doesn't self-edit. You're seeing Beto O'Rourke on the campaign trail.
That's a kind way of putting it.
But he's trying to not make a joke that's going to offend the identity politics caucus. And Biden doesn't care.
Clearly, he's had a lot of gas.
He said that Mike Pence was a good guy, and then not everyone, but a lot of people on the left jumped in and talked about how terrible Mike Pence was as a human being, in their words, and then he apologized for saying he was a good guy. So,
and then was mad that he had to apologize.
But he also once said that he would shove his rosary beads down the throat of any Republican who suggests Democrats aren't the party of faith. So again, he's got to own all that, but that sounds more Trumpian than what you're getting from some of these other Democratic
You do have those moments,
candidates.
and he and Trump got into a little, like, let me take you outside thing a few months ago, so he has it in him. Joe Biden, it is a name ID issue, but it's also the number one thing Democrats are looking for is someone who can beat Donald Trump. So they're thinking ahead to a general election.
Well, you're going to need name recognition.
You're going to need name recognition, and you're going to need expertise. Joe Biden can say, this is my record, this is what I've accomplished. He is actually the person who is the Obama legacy, right? He was his running mate. He was vice president for 8 years, said, if you like President Obama, I helped make a lot of this happen.
Endorse Joe Biden?
He's not going to in the primary. He said he's staying out. There are a lot of people he's close to.
Everybody will endorse a candidate after the primary.
No, but he's staying out of it because
following his record of voting president in the Senate by not endorsing anybody in the primary.
His own vice president.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Can I just say,
he's not
though,
going to endorse anybody.
that the big story out of that poll is that Kamala Harris has jumped 8 points. And she is gaining steam. She had the cleanest, best
raising
rollout.
money, but she's
raising money. She's not raising
1.5 in the same 24 hours of Bernie
There are a lot
Beto.
of people who are
Raising
donors
$6
from
million.
Hillary Clinton world that are going to Kamala. She is building a team all over the country with some of the best people on the Democratic side. That is the story for people to be paying attention to. She is definitely going to be in the mix here.
And Jessica, Joe Biden has had trouble fundraising in the past. That was one of the roadblocks, other than being discouraged by President Obama himself from running against.
Well, he was
Hillary
also
Clinton for the
grieving. His son had passed away recently, and there were huge pressures on his family.
He also apparently took as a veiled threat from Mrs. Clinton that if he did challenge her for the nomination, her team would go dirty. That's according to Bill McGurn's editorial.
The Clinton's going dirty. Who knew?
Listen, I mean, this is just... Hillary Clinton isn't running for president this time.
But
I don't think that what happened is... She won't go away. She gives speeches, she fundraises, she supports causes that matter to her. 65 million Americans voted for Hillary Clinton. And a lot of those people are still tremendous fans of her, feel that she was gypped in 2016.
Well, does that help or hurt Joe Biden then?
I don't think it has any effect on Joe Biden. The Clintons and the Bidens
Well, where are those
friends.
voters going to go? And where are the Bernie voters going to go? Because Bernie Sanders is a complete different iconic brand from Joe Biden. Both, been around a long time.
That's the beauty of a primary.
So where do
Bernie
those
Sanders
45
voters will
million
go for Bernie, and hopefully, if he doesn't get
They didn't all go for Clinton.
No, they didn't all go for Clinton, and he just hired someone actually who voted for Jill Stein. So there are definitely issues in that left far flank of the party. But this is not a story about Hillary Clinton anymore. This is a story about a huge, vibrant field of candidates that are putting themselves out there and advancing new and innovative proposals, and we should judge that.
And you know what they should do? They should do a Democratic debate on Fox News so they can reach people outside their tent and reach all those independents and people who sometimes watch us because they want to hear the whole story. I'm just preaching.
I know, and
those union workers, Joe from Scranton,
Get in there, Dagan.
Talk to him on the Fox News channel.